We've got to be simple, but the reality is the journey is like a river for customers, and it's not a lazy river. It is a class 5 rapids with waterfalls and major events. And that's actually what I wrote my book about, 4 Rocks, is to talk about those pain points that also, in many cases, we generate that make that journey harder, longer, and more difficult for the customer, and ultimately causes them to leave and go to our competitors.
Helping you create loyal customers and loyal employees, all through the power of simplicity. This is the Simple Brand Podcast, now heard around the world, including White Bear Lake, Minnesota. I'm your host, Matt Lyles, and this week, I'm talking with Sean Albertson. Sean's an internationally recognized thought leader, speaker, and transformational coach with over 20 years leading customer experience initiatives for companies ranging from startups to the Fortune 200. And Sean's the author of the award-winning book, 4 Rocks: Reduce Effort, Drive Loyalty, Transform the Customer Journey. Have you ever been tubing down a lazy river? I mean, it's pretty fun. You just sit back, relax, and let the current carry you on your way. But there's something that can come up and disrupt that easy float down the river. Rocks. If you have big enough rocks in the river, they create rapids, twists and turns and bumps that you have to manage around. And then the more rocks there are, the more rapids there are. And that's not as relaxing. Now, don't get me wrong. Whitewater rafting and trying to manage a raft or a kayak through the rapids can be pretty fun, if that's your goal. But it's not as fun if all you want is a smooth, lazy float down the river without you having to do much work. All right, cool story, Matt, but why are we talking about floating down a river? Well, it turns out your customer journey is a lot like a river. And as much as you assume their journey is like the smooth, lazy, straight path, that's usually not the case. There's usually some rocks in there disrupting your customer's ride and making some serious rapids when all they want is that smooth, lazy ride. And the more rocks your customers face, the more challenging their journey is. And the more challenging their journey is, the less they want to even be on that customer journey with you. And now, if you've been following me for a while, then you know your customers want a simple, smooth, effortless journey. The best way for you to deliver that to them is to know the rocks in their journey. The ones that are causing the most rapids, the ones that are the most challenging to your customer. And then once you know what those rocks are and where they are, you've got to work to remove those rocks. And that's exactly what Sean Albertson teaches in his 4 Rocks framework. Sean and I discuss the different types of rocks that can disrupt your customer's journey, and we discuss exactly what you can do to remove them and to ensure they don't come back. So here it is. Here's my interview with Sean Albertson. Hey, Sean. Welcome to the Simple Brand Podcast.
Matt, I'm so happy to be here with you. This is awesome. Thanks for inviting me to join you today.
Well, I'm glad you're here because I think we've got similar mindsets, similar lessons around customer experience, and I'm happy to dig into it.
Absolutely. It's kind of like the Vulcan mind meld. We're very in sync when it comes to being simple. That's for sure. So
that's it. Kindred spirits. One thing that I want to get into right off the bat is thinking about the customer journey, because a lot of leaders, when they describe their customer journey, when they talk about their customer journey, they talk about it as being pretty much a smooth, straight, linear path. But you've got a different take on that, right?
Well, yeah. I mean, I think we in business like to think we're designing very straightforward, easy paths, right? We know what we're talking about. We sit in a room, customers know where to be found, and we think, oh, this is what needs to happen. The reality, though, for most organizations is their customer journey is a winding mess. They're bouncing around from the website to the mobile app to the chat bot to the call center and back, and that's the reality. And ultimately, that's where that kindred spirit comes from, because we've got to be simple. But the reality is the journey is like a river for customers. And it's not a lazy river. It is a class 5 rapids with waterfalls and major events. And that's actually what I wrote my book about, Four Rocks, is to talk about those pain points that also, in many cases, we generate that make that journey harder, longer, and more difficult for the customer, and ultimately causes them to leave and go to our competitors.
That's it. Yeah. If it's not the lazy river, if the customer has to actually take effort to try and steer the ship, or to not bounce around, or to not bounce into all these rocks, it's pretty hard for them.
And you can blame someone like Amazon, right? I mean, they have made it, and you can blame them that companies that have figured it out and made things easy, they're sabotaging everybody else, because a customer's last best experience is their minimum expectation moving forward. And some companies are always getting better, and those that are not constantly focusing on being simple, being easy, they're getting left behind, and basically consumers are leaving them and moving to the easier company.
I appreciate how you said that customers compare us to their last best experience. You've come from a corporate background. I've come from a corporate background. And a lot of times, and I understand this, I get it, a lot of times we tend to look at our direct competitors and say, okay, who are our direct competitors that we're competing with, and how do we stack up against them? Your customers aren't comparing you to just your direct competitors. They're comparing you to that last best experience.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And it's, like I said, it's getting worse. The idea being, we have to be seamless. We have to drive that kind of effortless, frictionless. I mean, there's a lot of books, right, on this. The Effortless Experience that came out in 2013. You've got all these other frictionless books that have come out. A friend of mine, Dave Abram, just published a book, Ridiculously Easy to Do Business With, my book, 4X. We talk a lot about that, but the amazing thing is, companies, it's not as if they don't know. For the most part, companies know they got to be easy. The problem is they're not designed to be easy, because the business silos sabotage being easy across channels, and business silos are everywhere. And it's just natural. It's not as if they're trying to sabotage themselves, but just the fact that you got leaders over a contact center that's different than leaders over the website, and they kind of have their own agendas, their own metrics, their own measurements, their own purpose. It makes it problematic for a company to focus on that full journey, that full river. They only focus on their part. They're not looking up and downstream to see, how do I hand off to the next step in the process, and how do I receive when someone's coming towards me? That needs to be more of the conversation, but it's hard to do. And especially in the context of customer experience, it's hard to get things right when so many things can go wrong. CX profession is like the worst game of whack-a-mole ever, because you're constantly trying to get those things fixed, but you're not ever able to turn it onto a proactive approach and actually think strategically about, how do I make things easy or simple in the long term, because they're too reactive.
That's it. Yeah. Being too reactive. And you're talking about different silos that are set up in different functional areas. I see this too often, where the leadership, says that they're focused on the customer, says that they're focused on the overall corporate goals. But when it comes down to it, they're really focused on their own functional area goals and like what's within their ownership. And sometimes their goals may actually conflict with a different area's goals, and that's going to cause friction.
Oh, absolutely. There's nothing that keeps someone from that just naturally happening unless you plan accordingly to avoid it in the first place. And the way when I consult with companies and when I speak at corporate events and so forth, I talk a lot about breaking the silos, but in different ways, because you've got a lot of different silos. You've got people, because you do, one, have to align your people first. You got to win hearts and minds, and I dare say souls, to the purpose of what you're trying to accomplish, because it's around people. And then you've got to refine your processes. You got to make sure that your processes are aligned to reinforce the journey focus and the collaboration from that perspective. Going back to, if you set different priorities, your processes aren't aligned. If you set different metrics, your processes are not aligned. And then lastly is platform. A lot of people say people, process, and technology. I changed that in my one, because it's a third P, so people, process, and platform. But you got to design a platform, which is a collection of technology that works together. That's the definition of a platform, of bringing different technology that works together. Now, too often, especially today, and I don't know if you're seeing this when you talk to companies, but I'm seeing it. People are like asking the wrong question, like, how are we going to use generative AI? That's the wrong question.
Right.
It's more, how does our journey, our customer journey, need to leverage generative AI, and how will it work with the other channels? That's more of the right question. I mean, you can ask it in different ways, but it really is about thinking through that, because we love to, especially IT teams, and I ran some IT teams and tech teams in my career. We love to chase the shiny new object, right? And we're going to implement, and it's going to, make wonders for us. But often that needs to be last, because if your people and your processes aren't aligned first, your platform won't work, or your technology will not integrate.
And you can have leadership that talk to their team members and says, hey, here's what we need to do to make sure we're creating a frictionless, effortless, easy, simple experience. And they may be communicating that to their employees, even repeatedly. But then at the other level, at that other layer, the processes don't back it up. And so the employees are just going to shrug and say, great, I'm not able to do this.
Exactly. And it's so sad, but too often from an organization's perspective, that it's that insider groupthink. I see, and I almost know too much. A key is having someone, a partner, to really help you evaluate what you're doing and see the things for what it's worth. And that's ultimately what I try to do, but it's such an important area. There's plenty of people out there. Unfortunately, right now, there's more CX people doing consulting because they're looking for jobs, because the CX departments have been laid off a lot over the last year, as have UX and other design when the financials draw back. But there's a lot of people out there that can really help you look at your business with new set of eyes and see it from the customer's perspective that you may struggle with.
I want to talk about that for a moment, because a lot of CX leaders will have their particular focus area, their idea of this is what needs to be going into CX. And so we hear this all the time. Like we'll hear, we need to be creating moments that delight our customers. We need to create wow moments. We need to create magic moments. How does that mindset align with creating an effortless experience?
We've heard the stories, back in the day, like there's that Zappos story that the customer was on the call for, I think it was like 15 hours with the Zappos agent. And, wow, that was delighting. And then there's they tell the story about
a potty break somewhere.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. There were people that came on to the phone. I actually talked to somebody from Zappos about that experience, or about that situation. And then there's the other one with Ritz-Carlton and the giraffe. You remember the little stuffed giraffe story back in the day? Yeah, but the reality is you can do all of these things to try to delight, but you can't do them at scale. That's where it breaks down. There is no problem with trying to delight customers when you can. You just can't force delight into 99% of the situations. It doesn't work. Now, the reality is, in today's day and age, if you make something easy, that kind of delights customers, because everything else is so hard. Being simple, making it easy, intuitive, proactive, all of those things are, in essence, they do create delight by focusing on being easy. So they don't have to be against each other, but the reality is, if you want to create a wow moment in a new and unique way, you're not going to get that much opportunity. You make things really easy, really simple to do, then that actually can create delight. But more importantly, it reduces the likelihood of disloyalty and frustration. And I think you and I are probably, have both read the book, The Effortless Experience. Back when the book came out in 2013, they talked about that. It's not about delight, it's about keep things easy, make it easy, because they found that if something's hard to do, a customer is 4 times more likely to be disloyal. In my own research over the last couple of years, we're now 5 times more likely to be disloyal if something's hard. It's growing. And I would bet if I do a study tomorrow, it might be 6 times more likely. It's becoming a bigger expectation of being easy, across the board. And therefore, we have to survive, focus on that simplicity, that easy, that seamlessness.
To add to that, what's unfortunate is that a customer's perception of what's easy evolves over time. So what was considered easy in 2013 is not easy today. And what's considered easy today isn't going to be easy, 2, 3, 4, 5 years from now.
Yeah. And I think one of the challenges, especially like with new technology, generative AI, people can look at it, oh, that's going to make it easier if it's integrated. I mean, think about this news stories now of, generative AI getting things wrong or whatever. The reality is technology, it can be the solution, but only if done the right way with the right focus. And that's where a lot of companies get themselves into trouble is they think it easy from a specific task perspective. But what you and I are talking about is, no, it's easy from a full journey perspective. That's the focus of the customer. Too often the business is focused on the task.
Yeah. Well, so in that regards, let's jump into that. Let's jump into, whether it's AI or whether really it's just technology to help create what the brand, what leadership thinks is a easier experience. Where are some brands going wrong with that right now?
Well, I think one of the bigger challenges from brand awareness and brand strategy, again, is not doing journey mapping. I mean, journey mapping's been around forever, but it still amazes me how new it seems to be for a lot of people. There's a map, you can journey. And again, this is not journey mapping from the expectation of here's the process map. A lot of people think that's a journey map. This is our process. No. Journey map is what does it take for the customer complete said work, not your process. Because again, your process often fails. So it's the reality, not the design. So journey mapping, understanding its impact, and that's fundamentally where businesses fail, and they struggle because they're not thinking strategically and holistically with where the customer needs to go. There are others though that are using technology the right way, and the difference between them is they're focusing on the journey. They're bringing cross-functional teams to bear. They don't have to change the design of their organizations. We said earlier that silos are natural in business design. You don't have to change your organization design because you still have to have specialized focus. You can, I've seen it and it does work, but you need the groups to work together and you need to drive that value. So bringing those cross-functional groups together to talk about specific journeys, the top journeys, especially that your customers do, it forces them to have the conversation with each other, both during the strategy phase, but then after in the reality evaluation as well. Some of the best experiences that I've had coaching teams is getting the call center agents to sit down with the website designers and just to each other. And it's amazing once they actually finally sit down and talk, they're like, oh, you mean, when they call because this breaks, well, guess what? Here's how you fix it. Or vice versa. The call center says, hey, this is what's not working on the website. Oh, really? Our statistics show that that's really good. Yeah. But the people that it does break for, they're angry. They're really upset. I'll use an example. At a company I worked with, we saw within the rocks reporting, and the rocks reporting for me is finding the rocks. It identifies the specific and the most important rocks. Well, in our reporting that we developed with the organization, this one situation popped. It was down in like the high teens as importance to like number 2 overnight. And so immediately we knew, oh, something happened, right? And so we looked at it. The interesting point was the volume of that scenario wasn't very high. So we measure things like how often it happens as well as the pain, so that you're looking at that, because it's not always about the top call drivers. Too many call centers want to focus just on that to reduce call volume. The reality is, think of it from a pain perspective. So in this case, what we found almost immediately was that this online process was completely breaking. And not only was it causing them to call, but they had to then restart the entire process because of how bad it broke. Oh. Well, what happened was the marketing team had said, oh, we want to be easy. We're going to speed up the process. We're going to send the email that they can click on 2 days earlier to make it faster and easier. Well, the problem was they got in front of when the link was available to work. So they were sending the email faster, but the link wouldn't work. But not only was the link broken, it actually broke the process. So they had to start over from scratch, which added another week or two to the situation. And so we wouldn't have figured it out otherwise if we weren't looking the right way, because it was such a small volume.
Yeah.
it wasn't a really high process. But by looking at the kind of things, identifying the pain at scale in that context, we were able to identify it immediately, because it would have probably taken it forever for the call center to recognize, oh, this seems like it's a trend, because it wouldn't have felt that much because it was such a small volume. But we could see that immediately and then immediately address it. So it's amazing to see that when you really focus all of your energies across your different departments, how you can change things.
And I have to think most teams that do that, like most teams would see, oh, you know what? We were able to have this email sent 2 days earlier. Great job. High fives, everybody. Let's go have a pizza party. Good
Right.
job.
Yeah.
But this speaks to what you were talking about earlier, was having teams set up in silos that aren't connected. And I don't think that it's always necessary for every team to be connected and to have clear visibility and handholding to every other possible team across the enterprise. But it is necessary to understand what are the upstream effects, what are the downstream effects, like that are most immediate to you and any changes that you make. And so any change that you make, you've got to be able to talk to the other teams that are connected with you to understand what's going to be the benefit or detriment or effect of this change that you want to make.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And to your point, you have to have at least a couple of people within each department at a high enough level who are focused outward. I've seen companies call them the ease of doing business teams. I call them the rocks teams, right? They're people looking for rocks, right? But in their focus, while they represent their internal department, their focus is on the others and on creating. And so if you've got a person in each or a few people in each group, even better if you kind of have each of these people aligned against a certain number of key journeys, their focus is on working with each other in, ongoing in real time, so that as projects are coming up, they're able to look at it as, hey, we're changing this process. We're bringing this cross-functional team together. We're going to brainstorm what could go wrong, first off, because anything can happen, right? The Murphy's Law, right? But also then planning for that understanding of how are we going to make sure we work together and contributing to that overall purpose.
Yeah. And so each representative from those areas and that cross-functional team has the understanding of their area and knows the types of things to look out for, and knows if they see something else from another team, here's what's going to happen to my people. Here's what's going to happen to my team and the effect that's going to have. So what can we do to better fix that?
Exactly.
Well, so we've talked about the rocks a few times. So I do want to get into those. What are the types of rocks that can cause that friction, that can cause that disruption along the customer journey?
I kind of geeked out on this, right? So I had this epiphany from my son. I tell a story about it in my book, from my son, about the rocks. And it just changed my career. I'm here in Colorado. So the mountains, right up the road. I love going up there. And so rivers, rocks, rapids, we do a lot of that here, obviously, from that perspective. But I started to do a little research. And what I found was, so there's actually 3 types of rocks on Earth. And then there's a fourth. I'll explain that here in a second. But that's why I called it 4 rocks, because there are 4 types of rocks, really. So on Earth, sedimentary is the first rock. And sedimentary rocks are the ones with strata. You see them all the time. Well, that's in business, that translates to layers of complexity, silos, anything that separates. I'll even say, because one of the funny things is sedimentary rocks are created by skeletons from the past. Those create layers and complexity in our own business. The skeletons, right? We always talk about people who in our business who know where the bodies are buried, because that stuff happens, right? But sedimentary really represents all those different layers. And so there's things that you can do to both avoid that, and then obviously understanding that, how to start reducing that from a sedimentary rock perspective. Igneous rocks are fire, lava. That is mainly driven by outages, fire events. I mean, anything can happen internal to your organization. I worked in telco for 15 years, and goodness, network goes down when I was at T-Mobile or, at a cable company, et cetera. I mean, you're on fire. Your call center is, blowing up. So any fire event, but it also can be legal things, things that happen internally to your organization that aren't expected, right? Those fire events, disaster recovery of sorts.
PR.
The next is, yeah, exactly. And then the third is metamorphic rocks. And these are things like diamonds, where pressure and time change a rock from one type to another. Well, change for our customers create rocks.
Yeah.
I mean, any change, mergers and acquisitions for sure, but product changes, even brand changes, there's all sorts of change that creates problems. I mean, I like to talk about it but the younger folks, don't remember it, but Coke, new Coke, and the fiasco that was, that's, you don't change something and not expect there to be negative results. So again, that's another rock. So I looked at that. Those are the three earthly rocks. And I said, that's not enough.
There's one more.
Because there's outside factors.
Yeah.
Well, meteoric rocks that come from the outside and hit the earth, et cetera. So the reality is then that is external events. I mean, COVID, the biggest extinction level event rock in the recent history for a lot of organizations, external, but it can be really anything externally. We've got wars going on across the world. We got all this stuff happening that, again, that's external factors. And so looking at those four rocks and understanding where they come from and how they form, they can give you then the insights to say, all right, how do we avoid them up front, but then also how do we address them when they occur and create plans around them. It's a little geeky on that. And my wife said, I didn't know you were a geologist when I started having these conversations, but it kind of fits. And pretty much every problem you find at an organization level will fall into one of those four areas. So understanding them, having the context is key.
And pause for a moment, because hooray, like we just had a geology lesson here on the podcast.
Yeah,
that's always fun. It's always fun to bring in other subjects. But now, so I'm curious. So that's understanding the different types of rocks. But how can we go about, number one, knowing that those rocks exist in our organization, and how can we find them?
I like to talk about organizations. There's 5 levels of CX analytics maturity. And I like to talk about that because it's important for companies to understand where the future is and where they need to go and where they are today. And so this is just CX analytics. There's also CX maturity, which is execution of customer experience programs. That's more where your things like IVR integration with chatbots, blah, blah, blah comes from. That's the execution side. But to know what to execute on, you've got to analyze. And so that's where I really focus my education, my effort, my training and coaching is around how to identify, because it takes so many different pieces of technology and capabilities to understand the experience. So we like to think, surveys are enough. Well, surveys, if you do a couple of surveys, you're a 1 on the maturity scale, because that is the lowest minimum expectation. And you're getting very limited because, again, maybe a quarter of the people who take a survey actually give you comments.
Yeah.
And maybe half of those are valuable. So that's 1 on the maturity. If you're in Net Promoter, maybe a couple of different surveys. A 2 is more surveys. Now you're looking at your web team, maybe, and your phone team and your different chat. You've got a little broader use case. You're not just doing like maybe with a level 1 where it's just NPS. Now you're doing things like customer effort score. You're looking at maybe a satisfaction. You're looking at Net Promoter. You're digging deeper into that. That's still just a 2 on the maturity scale. 3, you're starting to look at other content. And this is where you have to expand your tool set. Things like text analytics, looking at your call transcripts, your chat transcripts, looking at your CRM notes, journey analytics, starting to look at what's happening transactionally and across the customer base. But that's a 3 because they're still in silos. They're still in pieces. When you get to a 4, you're measuring across the bandwidth. You are looking at text analytics, journey analytics, surveys, operational metrics. You're using AI to study it, but more importantly, it's integrated together. That's a 4. Now, some people, like said, 10 years ago, that would have been a 5. But in today's world, there's a new number 5. There's a new top maturity, because at a 4, you're able to clearly articulate and understand where the biggest challenges are, because all of that data is coming to bear in coordination and you're using AI to figure it out.
Right.
5, you're now in real time changing the behavior with that knowledge. So the ability, for instance, to see someone's going down a path that's going to end up in a negative experience and interrupting it and changing the outcome. That's a 5. And that's the new 5 that we didn't usually have, because that's what's being driven by AI and capabilities, is to do that. Now, again, people like stories. Let me tell a story about that to really exemplify what a 5 is. So I had an issue with an organization I didn't even know about. It was going to come up. It was about a month out. If I didn't take care of it, there was going to be a problem. They proactively reached out. Great. They sent me an email and said, hey, this is coming up. Just want you to know. Oh, great. If you need more information, click here for the link. Oh, great. Click there, went directly on their website to the FAQ page around that, instructions and so forth. I read it and I said, seems like I might have to go in person to get this taken care of. I really don't want to. So I picked up the phone and called. I hit the IVR. It recognized me from my phone number. I hit the IVR and they say, hey, Mr. Albertson, I see that this is going on your account. Is this why you're calling? Why, yes. Great. Let me get you directly to that department.
Wow.
Right.
Wow.
Routed me. Right. Yeah. Skipped all the representative and pounding 0. Right. Routed me directly to the group. Agent pops up, says, hey, Mr. Albertson, I got your information here. I see this is why you're calling. What kind of questions can I answer for you? I asked my question and she said, yes. Unfortunately, you're going to have to come in person, but I just sent you a link via text and email. Click on that, schedule your appointment. Oh, great. Got the link, looked at my calendar, scheduled it. A couple of weeks out. Perfect. Hung up. No problem. I got reminders about that upcoming appointment, 2 weeks out, a week out, 3 days before, with options to reschedule if something came up. Nope, no issues. I was still planning on doing that. The morning of my appointment, I got a text message and an email from the company that says, when you get on site today, click this link. Interesting. So I got there with my phone. I walk in the door. I click the link. You're second up. It put me in queue, and you're going to be at desk 6. Awesome. I barely sat down in the waiting room and I'm being called up to the desk and the person there says, hello, Mr. Albertson, I've got your information here. We're ready to take care of you. Let's get you on with your day. Wow. The key there is going back to what you described, seamless between all the contact channels, but interruptive across them, and making sure that instead of knowing there's a frustration about yelling into the phone or getting to the right person, right there. I mean, just interrupting that at scale across the board. Here's the crazy part. Some of the companies that I have horrible experiences with win awards for customer service and customer experience. This company, this seamless experience, local DMV, I mean, long time known as butt of all jokes for experience and being horrible. The DMV has figured it out.
So is this the government level DMV?
County level.
Or is this one of those where somebody actually went in and said, hey, let me take this and own this and create the experience?
County level DMV. And what they were able to do, they looked at the journey. It was a very common journey. And they knew what the probability of things were going to happen. And they designed it and orchestrated it so that technology and people would work seamlessly, proactively to accomplish the journey. And here's the reality for the audience. If the DMV can do it, you all can do it too. I mean, that's the opportunity we have and that's the expectation. Unfortunately, now that DMV experience, I'm going to have one if I go to, Best Buy, Nordstrom. I'm going to expect there to be that kind of integration and capability between, apps and mobile and on-site and on-premise. And that's what I'm going to expect. And the companies that get it are going to win. The companies that don't, they may end up like Bed Bath & Beyond the ability to survive. Let's just say that. So.
Well, and too many companies are saying, well, I mean, that's the DMV. I don't even compete with them. Here are my competitors, and that's who I'm going to compare myself against. And that's not what your customer does. If your customer walks in thinking, if the DMV can do it, so can you.
Yep, exactly.
Man. All right, Sean, I've got one last question for you. If you were to create a 5-song playlist for 4 Rocks, what songs would you include?
This is a great question. I actually love this. So the first time I told my story about my kids and the rocks on stage, well before I wrote the book, someone saw me 6 months later at another conference. They're like, I recognize you. Wait, who are you? How do I know you? Hey, you're the rocks guy. All right. So I'm the rocks guy now. So everything on my list is about rocks. So I'm also a kind of an 80s and 90s kid. I obviously was born in the 70s. But I mean, for those about to rock, we salute you, AC/DC. That's on my list. Absolutely. Queen, We Will Rock You. Another great one. I Want to Rock, Twisted Sister. Come on, there's nothing better than that. Rock of Ages by Def Leppard. And one of my favorite, because I'm a little bit of a grunge guy from my college years, Cherub Rock by the Smashing Pumpkins. Wow. So I just love that, but anyway, really getting the energy going from a rock perspective and understanding it, that's what my focus is. And yeah, there's rock and roll, but then there's, geology. So a little different, but hey, still good.
That's it. And it helps just keep that in mind. Like, oh, you know what? Be constantly looking for the rocks. There you go.
Exactly.
Well, Sean, I have learned so much I've learned so much from the book. I've learned so much from you, but where can people go to learn more?
So my website is cx4rocks.com. Customer experience for rocks. And you can reach me there. I'm also on LinkedIn at Sean Albertson. Those are probably the two best ways to get a hold of me. But this is great. And thank you again, Matt, for having me. And again, kindred spirits on simplicity. But it's probably the hardest thing a company can do is try to be simple.
Yeah.
That's the reality. Yeah, simple is not simple. Simple is very hard to get right because, again, so many things can go wrong and it's getting harder. And so I love it that your podcast is constantly keeping this the focus of the audience and generating that, because that's where companies are going to win or lose, is on their simplicity, on their easy, on their avoidance of rocks. And so again, thank you for having me today.
Oh, absolutely. Thank you. I hope you enjoyed my discussion with Sean Albertson. You can learn more from him at cx4rocks.com. And be sure to grab your copy of Sean's book, 4 Rocks. It's going to help you learn how to drive loyalty in your customers simply by reducing their effort in all the right places in their journey. And if you're enjoying the Simple Brand podcast, go ahead and hit the subscribe button. It's going to make it so much simpler for you to get future episodes like the next one featuring Jennifer Kinney. We'll be discussing lessons from her book, The Innovation Mindset, a proven method to fuel performance and results. So go ahead and subscribe. You'll automatically get Jennifer's episode as soon as it's live. Until then, keep it simple.